Okay, welcome back to this video series on how to create a simple project in our software. I'd like to spend the next few videos focusing on the steps required to build a project plan. So those steps, let's see here. This first video, I'm going to just focus on entering tasks and estimates for durations of these tasks. How do we connect these tasks? And I'll talk a little bit about subtasks as well. So let me get into the software here. Okay, so I've returned to the project that we were working on. First, we're going to enter some Tier 1 level activities that we've identified with the project team. So in general, the project team that we might have a brainstorming session with, or creating a project plan together, should understand this two-tier approach. It's quite simple. We're going to identify larger blocks of work that will be used to contain as kind of small containers for many tasks, and that could be cross-functional tasks, but really those tasks necessary to get that block of work completed. And how do we control the release of those blocks of work into execution to help focus capacity? So there is a video you can watch. It's in the splash screen as well. It's in a listing of videos towards the end. It's called Boxes and Dots. And this kind of outlines the concept of simplifying the coordination efforts required to focus this resource capacity. So if you want to listen to that, that may be good fodder for kind of gaining a good information on why we're suggesting this concept in the first place. Okay, here I'm going to enter 5 different tasks for a relatively small duration target. For smaller duration cycle time projects of maybe a couple months or less, you may have those phases that a project flows through may become those larger blocks of work. Projects typically flow through 4 to 7 phases. An example of that might be in the engineering to order project environment. You might have basic engineering that flows into detail engineering. There's some procurement activities. You may have some assembly or manufacturing, and then testing and shipment. So those might be your phases, your primary phases in a maintenance, repair, overhaul type environment. The phases might be a bit different, where you do induction activities, then disassemble the piece of equipment, you inspect it, you repair it, you reassemble it, and there may be some parts repair as well in larger organizations like an airframe repair overhaul facility. And then they move into test. So those might be the phases for a smaller project. For a project that takes a month or 2 to complete, you really don't need probably much more than that at the Tier 1 or the larger block level. For larger projects that span 6 months, 12 months, multi-year projects may require those phases then to be broken up into buckets that we can kind of get our arms around and deploy resource capacity in a way that's focused. So first we're going to walk through, think through that strategy for focusing during execution. So and how do we assign that capacity to those Tier 1 buckets and then lay out your Tier 1 tasks. So I'm going to do a simple example here. In a separate document, I have the phases that I wrote down for a typical engineer to order environment. I'm just going to copy those. I'm going to come back here and Control V to paste those in. So those become my tasks. And then let me go through a little bit of what these columns represent. Task type, there's going to be tasks and subtasks is typically what you're going to see here. This is a column that we can add checklists to the task, either at the Tier 1 level or at the Tier 2 level. And I'll show you that in a second. So these can be checklists, which typically are going to be like maybe some ticklers around things we don't want to forget, or it's not really a task that needs to be completed, but it could be the criteria for completing that task as well. What does closed or done really mean? Okay, task type, the name, of course, the status, and this is going to have not started for those projects that we're planning. And then in execution, we can place them in progress or complete. The duration of the task, typically in days, could be in hours. What are the predecessor, successor links, resources, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more in depth as we go. How do we roll durations and resources up from the lower level activities, the activities that folks really need to know because they need to execute on a day-to-day basis, into those larger blocks of work. Okay, so I've copied those phases in here, and those are going to become my tier 1 activities for this particular project. Okay, you'll notice that this view is, and I'm going to close this resource panel down below. Don't really need that open right now. It's divided into 2 parts. On the left-hand part are all the tasks, and we're going to add some subtasks in a moment, but these are the lines for each tasks. Similar to Microsoft Project in some way, how that's kind of laid out. On the right-hand side, you will see the waterfall chart. I'm going to make these, give these a little bit of duration just so we can see visually a little bit easier. Okay, we have, make them all just 5 days in duration. Now some of these might be longer. Obviously, we're making some estimates on these durations, but just to make it a little bit more normalized, we have maybe engineering detail side taking a little bit longer, some procurement activity build test is going to be shorter, right? Maybe only 3 days, and then we're going to put 2 days for customer acceptance. So we're at roughly 40 days. That's about 2 months worth of effort. These are in work days, assuming again 5 days a week of work days. Okay, so now these are not in sequence yet over here, so let's go ahead and put them in sequence. The easiest way to do that, of course, we could use predecessor, successor, put these numbers in the different columns and do it that way, but easy for me just to connect these tasks. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is if I have all the tasks already listed, I can come over here on the left-hand side and I can select those tasks and connect them. Okay, now I did it backwards, but because I selected them from bottom to top. So I'm going to undo that. Right, here's my undo button. I'm going to select them from top to bottom. I'm going to say link those tasks, and it's going to link properly, and I'll go ahead and link this one here. So let me come back to this button. So if we just click on one of these rows, it's going to open up this header row, and it might be slightly different based on the task type. Subtasks won't have all these options. But there are a few options just to review. One is I can indent row, so I can have multiple layers within my project plan. I'm not sure how useful that is, but some people really love just to indent and put multiple layers, so we can do that here. We also can convert some tasks to subtasks. I'll show how that works in a minute. This is inserting rows and adding a special task. I'll show that in a few minutes around milestones or preparation points or purchasing activities. Here's we're going to edit the task properties. What task type? We can change the task type here, rename it if we want to, status, durations. Okay, we can cut it, paste, and delete, and so on. I won't really go into this, but you can explore this if you want to. It's using this per chart functionality. Okay, so here I have a pretty linear network, right? In general, we would like to design even the most complex network as linear as possible. And if you can just kind of keep that in the back of your head as you're thinking about the phase structure, certainly is linear, right? Within any project, we do phase 1 before 2, before 3, before 4. It should be linear, let me put it that way. A lot of organizations will run with all those phases overlapping, especially on slightly larger projects, which I won't get into the details right now, but it's a pretty inefficient way to execute. So we really do want to, as much as possible, finish one phase before the next with only reasonable overlap. Okay, so we have this project plan in linear fashion. And so it just makes things a lot simpler in how we prioritize and assign capacity. There may be secondary streams of work. Of course, I just put a very simple, but if this is an engineered order type project and we have different features, you know, those features in a very larger scale project might require their own level of design, and even maybe procurement for building separate parts to an overall piece of equipment, and then it's integrating later. So it's not integrated up front. Regardless, we're just doing a simple example right now. We can think through more complex examples as you bring them to the table. Okay, so these are the larger blocks, and we haven't introduced subtasks yet. So I'll enter a few subtasks here. I'm just going to enter 4 of them. So I'm going to put them into the detailed design box, or tier 1 tasks. And I'm just going to say insert 4 rows above. Then I'm going to select these 4 rows and make them subtasks. So I didn't put a name in here yet, but let's go ahead and put a feature. And we'll just say, hey, there's 4 different features that we're developing in the detailed design phase, and those become our subtasks. So all those 4 features we want to have done before we can finish, you know, procurement and manufacturing. 1 might finish before 2, and procurement and manufacturing might start. That's not a problem. Okay, so we have these 4 subtasks, and when I entered in there, it removed the link from this task to this task and created that link here. That's because I made them tasks first and then converted them to subtasks. So I can remove this link; it's not needed, right? Just come over here, remove that link, link this back up. If I don't want that to happen in the future, then I can turn off this auto link function. That means if I insert something, Concerto's not trying to remove or insert links automatically, which is what it just did, right? Okay. So there may be, let's make some durations on these tasks as well, just so we can see them on the right hand side here. So there may be some sequence in the way that these tasks are executed, and so because we've used the task type of network, which is most commonly used task type, there are some roll-up options we can use that are not network driven, more probably for like MRO type operations where it's more volume driven depending on the resource type needed for a particular tier 1 task. That's a different discussion. If you're an MRO and you're interested in that, we can talk more. But typically in a regular project environment, or ETO, or where I'm really planning the project from the beginning, there may be some sequence to these tasks, right? And we don't know what that sequence might be, but you might say this is the sequence. These 2 tasks can start on day 1, but there's some dependencies on this work, right? So the overall duration from the tier 2 perspective is, you know, 2 days to finish these 2, then 2 days and 2 days, or 6 days, right? So how does this roll up work from this level up to the detailed design? Now, if you remember, I put a manual duration in here of 10 days, and that was after I had created those subtasks. So right now, the roll up between this tier 1 and the subtasks has been turned off, most likely. Let me just see. I can come over here, I can check that. I can check that over here on the right hand side, and you can see that the auto roll up has been turned off. So if I manually enter in some value for duration, we're going to turn off the auto roll up because we don't want to overwrite something that somebody puts in manually, right? Okay, so to turn that back on, there's a couple things I can do. I can select that particular task. I can come over here to roll up subtask, turn on the auto settings back on, and save that. Okay. So now I can see my value change from 10 days to 6 days, and 6 days is the roll up from the subtasks. Okay. So that's how the roll up options work in a pretty simple a simple way of explaining it. Some mini network below the tier 1 activity of the priority of the work, how the work can be performed. And that will determine the length of the tier 1 activity. Okay, and the resources required, we'll cover that in the next video. So in this video, we've covered entering the tier 1 and tier 2 tasks, how to connect those tasks in a pretty simple way, and how this roll-up thing works from the tier 1 to the tier 2 level. Okay, all right, go ahead and save your project. I'm going to go here and under, project, save with comment. I'm going to call this after tasks. Okay, something to that effect. And I'll save that, and it will be available over here in my revision history whenever I want to. Okay, so now I can leave this project, close out of that all together, close out, I can share it, I'll come back when I want to, and can pick up where I left off. All right, we'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.